The fever had been burning through Delilah Turner's body for 3 days when her husband Marcus threw her belongings into the dust-choked street of Naco, Arizona, and told her never to come back. She collapsed on the wooden planks outside their modest home, her cotton dress soaked through with sweat, her dark hair plastered to her face as the brutal July sun beat down mercilessly on that scorching afternoon in 1882. Through the haze of her illness, she could hear a woman's laughter coming from inside the house, high-pitched and cruel, and she realized with a sickening clarity that the seamstress who had been coming by for fittings had been doing far more than measuring fabric. Delilah tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. The world spun violently, and she tasted copper in her mouth. Somewhere in the distance, she heard horses and the rumble of wagon wheels, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel, she could see the shimmering heat rising from the hard, packed earth. She thought about crawling, about trying to reach the boarding house 2 streets over where Mrs. Henderson might take pity on her, but her arms would not cooperate. The fever had stolen her strength, leaving her as helpless as a newborn foal. She did not know how long she lay there. Time became meaningless, marked only by the waves of heat that rolled over her and the spasms of coughing that racked her chest. People passed by. She was dimly aware of their voices and footsteps, but no one stopped. A woman sick in the street was either dangerous with contagion or simply not worth the trouble. Delilah felt tears slip down her temples, mixing with the sweat and dust. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of cooking his meals and mending his clothes and believing his promises, and this was how it ended. Cast out like garbage, left to die in the street while he entertained his mistress in the bed they had shared. Through the roaring in her ears, Delilah heard a new sound, the jingle of spurs and the heavy tread of boots. A shadow fell across her face, blocking out the punishing sun, and she squinted up at the figure standing over her. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest over a dusty shirt and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. She could not make out his face clearly, but she saw his jaw tighten as he looked down at her. "Madam." His voice was deep and rough, with a hint of concern that cut through her delirium. "Can you hear me?" Delilah tried to speak, but only a weak croak emerged from her parched throat. The man crouched beside her, and she caught a glimpse of weathered features, a strong nose and eyes the color of storm clouds. He pressed the back of his hand against her forehead and cursed softly. "Burning up," he muttered. He looked around, his gaze sweeping the street. "Anyone know this woman?" Several people had stopped to watch, drawn by curiosity, but no one stepped forward. Delilah saw Mrs. Chen from the general store shake her head and turn away. Young Billy from the livery stable shuffled his feet and looked at the ground. The silence stretched, heavy and condemning. The cowboy's mouth set in a hard line. Without another word, he slipped his arms beneath Delilah's body and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head lolled against his chest, and she could smell leather and sage and honest sweat. She wanted to tell him to put her down, that she was not worth the effort, that he would catch whatever sickness had taken hold of her, but darkness was pulling at her consciousness, dragging her down into its depths. "I have got you," he said quietly, and those words followed her into oblivion. When Delilah woke, she was lying in a real bed with clean sheets and a patchwork quilt pulled up to her chin. The room was small and simply furnished, with rough-hewn walls and a single window that let in the golden light of late afternoon. A lantern hung from a hook near the door, unlit in the daytime brightness. For a confused moment, she thought perhaps she had dreamed everything, that she was still in her own home. But then she turned her head and saw the cowboy sitting in a chair beside the bed, his hat resting on his knee. He noticed she was awake immediately and leaned forward. "Easy now. You have been out for near on 2 days." 2 days. Delilah's mind struggled to process this information. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. The cowboy stood and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, then slipped his hand behind her head to help her drink. The water was cool and sweet, and she gulped it gratefully. "Slow," he cautioned. "You will make yourself sick again." When she had drunk her fill, he eased her back against the pillow and returned to his chair. Delilah studied him properly for the first time. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh light. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and his jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. There was nothing particularly handsome about his features taken individually, but together they formed a face that was strong and honest and somehow reassuring. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Name is Russell Dawson," he replied. "This is my place about 5 miles outside of Naco. Been working a small ranch out here for the past 3 years. Why did you bring me here?" Russell shrugged, a gesture that seemed almost embarrassed. "Could not just leave you dying in the street. Did not seem right. You should not have. I might be contagious. Might be. But I have got a pretty strong constitution. Figured I would take my chances." He paused, then asked gently, "What happened to you? Why were you out there like that?" Shame burned hot in Delilah's cheeks, hotter even than the fever that still simmered in her blood. She turned her face away. "My husband decided he did not want me anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. When Russell finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "He threw you out. While you were sick, he found someone else. Someone who is not plain and dull, I suppose." The words tasted bitter. "That is not right. That is not anywhere close to right." Russell stood abruptly and paced to the window, his hands clenched at his sides. "A man makes vows. Sickness and health, those are the words. He does not get to just break them when things get inconvenient." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over Marcus. It does not matter now. What is done is done. Russell turned back to face her, and there was something fierce in his expression. "You are going to stay here until you are well. I have got the space, and I will not hear any arguments about it. Once you are back on your feet, you can decide what you want to do next, but you are not going back to that town until you are strong enough to hold your head high. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." He picked up his hat and settled it on his head. "I need to tend to the horses and check on the cattle. There is more water in the pitcher, and I will bring you some broth in a bit. You just rest." Before she could protest further, he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Delilah lay still, staring at the ceiling beams, trying to make sense of this strange turn of events. A man she had never met, a stranger, had shown her more kindness in 2 days than her own husband had in months. The thought should have filled her with gratitude, but instead it made her heart ache with a complicated mix of emotions she could not begin to untangle. Over the next few days, Russell tended to her with a gentle patience that astonished her. He brought her broth and bread, helped her sit up when she was too weak to manage alone, and changed the cool cloths he laid across her forehead to bring down the fever. He was careful to maintain propriety, always keeping a respectful distance except when necessity required otherwise, but his touch was always gentle, his manner always kind. Delilah learned that he lived alone on his small ranch, running about 50 head of cattle and a handful of horses. He had come west from Missouri 5 years earlier, looking for a fresh start after his parents died in a riverboat accident. He spoke little about himself. seeming more interested in making sure she was comfortable. But she pieced together details from his brief comments, and the way he moved around the house with the easy competence of someone long accustomed to solitude. On the fourth day, the fever finally broke. Delilah woke feeling weak but clear-headed for the first time since Marcus had cast her out. She could hear Russell moving around in what she assumed was the main room, and the smell of coffee drifted through the open door. Her stomach growled, and she realized she was genuinely hungry rather than simply forcing down whatever Russell brought her. She sat up slowly, testing her strength, and was relieved when the room did not spin. Her legs were shaky when she swung them over the side of the bed, but they held her weight. Someone, presumably Russell, had left one of his clean shirts draped over the back of the chair, and she pulled it on over her thin chemise, grateful for the extra coverage. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves several times, but it was better than parading around in her undergarments. The main room of Russell's home was larger than the bedroom, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs near the window. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, and shelves lined with books and supplies covered another wall. It was a bachelor's space, practical and unadorned, but it was clean and well-maintained. Russell stood at the stove, his back to her, stirring something in a pot. He turned when he heard her footsteps and nearly dropped the spoon. "You should be in bed." "I have been in bed for days." "I needed to move." Delilah made her way to the table and sat down carefully. "Whatever you are cooking smells wonderful. Just stew, nothing fancy." But she could see he was pleased. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it before her, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to adjust." The stew was rich and savory, full of tender meat and vegetables, and Delilah had to restrain herself from wolfing it down. Russell sat across from her with his own bowl, watching to make sure she kept the food down. When she had finished half the portion, she set her spoon aside and met his eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I know I have said it before, but I truly mean it. You saved my life." Russell looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they would not have. The whole town walked past me. You were the only one who stopped." She folded her hands on the table. "I will leave as soon as I am strong enough. I will not impose on your kindness any longer than necessary." "Where will you go?" It was a simple question, but it hit her like a blow. Where would she go? She had no family, no money, no friends who would risk Marcus's displeasure by taking her in. The reality of her situation crashed over her, and she felt panic rising in her chest. Russell must have seen it in her face because he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough and warm, calloused from hard work. "You do not have to figure it all out today. Stay here while you recover your strength. Once you are feeling better, we can talk about what comes next. I am not going to throw you out, Delilah." It was the first time he had used her name, and hearing it in his deep voice made something twist in her chest. She realized she was still wearing her wedding ring, a simple gold band that Marcus had placed on her finger in a ceremony 5 years ago. The metal felt heavy suddenly, like a shackle. She pulled her hand from under Russell's and tugged at the ring, working it over her knuckle with shaking fingers. "Here," Russell said quietly. He produced a small tin from a shelf and opened it, revealing a collection of odds and ends, buttons and nails and bits of string. "You can put it in here if you like. Keep it or sell it, whatever you decide." Delilah dropped the ring into the tin with a soft clink. It felt like closing a door, like severing the last thread that bound her to her old life. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. She started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, and Russell came around the table and knelt beside her chair, offering her his bandana and a steady presence but nothing more. He did not try to hold her or tell her everything would be fine. He simply stayed there while she wept, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Delilah felt wrung out but oddly lighter. She wiped her face and handed the bandana back to Russell, who stood and returned to his chair without comment. "I will earn my keep," she said firmly. "I can cook and clean and mend. I will not be a burden." Russell considered this. "I will not say no to decent cooking. My own attempts leave much to be desired, but you are not to push yourself too hard. You are still recovering." They fell into an easy routine over the following weeks. Delilah took over the cooking and household tasks, finding satisfaction in restoring order to Russell's bachelor existence. She scrubbed and swept, mended his worn shirts, and coaxed vegetables from the small garden plot behind the house. Russell worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, riding out to check the water sources and move the cattle to fresh grazing, repairing fences and breaking horses. They ate their meals together, and slowly, cautiously, they began to talk. Delilah learned that Russell had grown up on a farm, the youngest of 4 brothers. His childhood had been happy, full of hard work and laughter, until the accident that claimed his parents and left him feeling adrift. He had come west seeking something, though he admitted he had not known what until he found this piece of land and realized he wanted to build something permanent, something that would last. In turn, she told him about her own past. She had been raised in an orphanage in St. Louis, a lonely childhood devoid of affection or warmth. When Marcus had come along, a successful merchant with a steady income and a house in Arizona, she had thought he was her salvation. She had believed that marriage would give her the home and family she had always craved. Instead, it had taught her that loneliness could exist even in the company of another person. "He was not always cruel," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink, and the air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. "In the beginning, he was kind enough. But after a year or so, he started to pull away. I think he was disappointed in me." "Disappointed how?" Russell's voice was carefully neutral. "We never had children." "I think he blamed me for that, and I was not the kind of wife he really wanted. I am not charming or witty or beautiful. I am just plain Delilah, and that was not enough." Russell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured but firm. "There is nothing plain about you. You are strong and capable and kind. Any man who could not see that is a damn fool." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she was grateful for the gathering darkness that hid her blush. "You are kind to say so." "I am not kind. I am honest." He stood and stretched, his joints popping. "I am going to check on the horses before bed. Sleep well, Delilah." She watched him walk toward the barn, his silhouette dark against the twilight sky, and felt something shift in her chest. It was dangerous, what she was beginning to feel. She was a married woman, still legally bound to Marcus even if he had discarded her like trash. And Russell was her rescuer, her benefactor. Any feelings she had for him were likely just gratitude twisted into something else by proximity and circumstance. She could not, would not, allow herself to hope for anything more. But as the days turned into weeks, it became harder to deny that something was growing between them. Russell began to linger over breakfast, sharing stories about his day or asking her opinion on ranch matters. He taught her to ride, spending patient hours in the corral helping her learn to control his gentlest mare. When she accidentally cut her hand while chopping vegetables, he cleaned and bandaged the wound with such careful attention that she had to look away from the intensity in his eyes. One afternoon in late August, Russell returned from town with supplies and a troubled expression. Delilah was kneading bread dough when he came in, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, dusting flour from her hands. Russell set the sacks on the table and removed his hat, running his hand through his hair. "I saw your husband in town. He was with that woman, the one he left you for." Delilah's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "I see. Did he ask about me?" "No." Russell's jaw tightened. "He did not even mention your name, but I asked around discreetly. Seems he has been telling people that you ran off with another man, that you abandoned him." The unfairness of it stole her breath. After everything Marcus had done, he was painting himself as the victim, rewriting their history to preserve his reputation. She sat down heavily, her legs suddenly weak. "I am sorry," Russell said. "I thought you should know what story he is spreading. It is not your fault." Delilah stared at her flour-dusted hands. "I suppose I should have expected it. Marcus always cared more about appearances than the truth." Russell pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "You could fight it. You could go back to town and tell people what really happened." "Who would believe me? A woman has no standing against her husband. He could say anything, and people would take his word over mine." She looked up at Russell, trying to smile but failing. "Besides, I do not want to go back. I do not want to see him or that house or any of it ever again." "Then do not." Russell's hand moved as if to take hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. "Stay here, not as a guest or someone earning her keep, but because you want to, because this is your home now." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things they had not said. Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Russell could hear it. "People would talk," she said quietly. "A single man and a married woman living under the same roof. Your reputation would suffer." "Let them talk. I do not give a damn about my reputation if it means sending you back to that town with nowhere to go." "Russell." She finally looked at him fully, meeting those storm-gray eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" He held her gaze, and she saw him warring with himself, trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth caring about, someone worth protecting. And because these past weeks with you here, they have been the best I have had since I came to this territory. The house feels like a home now instead of just a place I sleep. I look forward to coming in at the end of the day because I know you will be here. I like hearing you hum while you work. I like the way you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating. I like everything about having you here, and I am not ready to let that go." Delilah's breath caught. "Russell, I cannot. I am still married, and even if I were not, it is too soon. I have nothing to offer you. No dowry, no property, no prospects. I would only be a burden." "You are not a burden. You have never been a burden." Russell's voice was rough with emotion. "I am not asking you to marry me or make any promises. I am just asking you to stay. We can figure out the rest as we go." She wanted to say yes. Heaven help her, she wanted to throw caution to the wind and embrace this chance at happiness. But the practical part of her, the part that had learned harsh lessons about depending on men, held her back. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "This is not a decision I can make lightly." Russell nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands, no matter how long you need to think." That night, Delilah lay awake in the small bedroom, staring at the ceiling and turning the problem over in her mind. She had spent so much of her life trying to be what others wanted her to be, first in the orphanage, then with Marcus. She had twisted herself into knots trying to please people who would never be satisfied. Now, for the first time, she had a choice. She could play it safe, leave the ranch and try to make it on her own in some other town where no one knew her history. Or she could take a risk, stay with Russell, and see if this fragile thing growing between them could become something real and lasting. The answer, when it came to her in the quiet hours before dawn, was surprisingly simple. She was tired of being afraid, tired of living small and careful. Russell had shown her more respect and kindness than any man she had ever known. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked. He treated her like an equal, not a possession or an obligation. If there was even a chance that they could build something together, was she really going to walk away from it because of fear? She rose with the sun and found Russell already in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked tired, as if he had slept as poorly as she had. When he saw her, he straightened, his whole body tensing. "I have thought about your offer," Delilah said, her voice steady, "and I would like to stay if you truly meant it." The relief that washed over Russell's face was almost comical. "I meant it, every word. Then I will stay." She crossed to where he stood and held out her hand, formal and businesslike. "Partners, then. Equal partners in running this ranch." Russell looked at her outstretched hand and laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something in her chest flutter. But he took her hand and shook it firmly. Partners. They spent the rest of the day in a state of careful happiness, both of them a little giddy with relief and possibility. Russell showed her the ranch's account books, explaining his plans for expanding the herd and improving the property. Delilah listened intently, offering suggestions that he considered with genuine interest. It felt like laying a foundation, building something solid that could support whatever came next. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn. Delilah had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months, and she could hardly remember the woman she had been when Russell first carried her through his door. That woman had been broken, hollowed out by betrayal and illness. The woman she was becoming was stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after dinner, Russell said, "I need to make a trip to Tucson next week. Some business with the Territorial Land Office. I will be gone for 3 or 4 days." Delilah felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of him being away, but she pushed it down. "I will be fine here. I can manage the animals and the house." "I know you can." Russell was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking maybe you should come with me. It would be good for you to get away from the ranch for a bit, see some different scenery." "Would that be wise? People might talk." "People are already talking, I am sure. But if it bothers you, we could get separate rooms at the hotel, everything above board and proper." He glanced at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Mostly, I just do not want to be away from you for that long." Delilah's heart stuttered. "You do not have to say things like that. I am not saying it because I have to. I am saying it because it is true." Russell turned to face her fully. "Delilah, I know your marriage left you with a lot of hurt and doubt. And I know I am probably rushing things by saying this. But these past couple months with you have made me realize something. I am in love with you. Somewhere between finding you in that street and teaching you to ride and watching you bring life to this place, I fell completely in love with you." Delilah stared at him, her mind reeling. A part of her had known, of course. She had seen the way he looked at her, felt the charge in the air between them. But hearing him say it out loud was different. It made it real, undeniable. "Russell, I am still married. Legally, I am still bound to Marcus." "I know. And I am not asking you to do anything about that right now. I am just telling you how I feel. You do not have to say anything back. You do not have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know." But that was the thing. She did feel the same way, or at least she was starting to. The seed of affection she had been trying to ignore had been growing steadily, watered by Russell's constant kindness and attention. She cared for him deeply, and it terrified her. "I need time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to be sure that what I feel is real and not just gratitude or dependence. I cannot afford to make another mistake." "That is fair." Russell stood and stretched. "The trip to Tucson is in 5 days. You do not have to decide about coming until then. But think about it. A change of scenery might help you clear your head." Over the next few days, Delilah wrestled with her feelings. She watched Russell work, admiring the easy strength of his movements and the care he took with the animals. She noticed the little things he did to make her life easier, like making sure the water barrel was always full or fixing the squeaky hinge on the cupboard door without being asked. She thought about the way his face lit up when he saw her, the way his laughter made her feel lighter. The truth, she realized, was that she had been falling in love with him almost from the beginning. She had been too afraid to acknowledge it, too damaged by Marcus's betrayal to trust her own heart. But Russell was nothing like Marcus. He was constant where Marcus had been fickle, honest where Marcus had been deceitful, generous where Marcus had been selfish. And he had proven, again and again, that he cared about her happiness and well-being above his own comfort. The night before they were to leave for Tucson, Delilah could not sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the night through the open window, the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, she rose and padded into the main room, intending to make some tea. Russell was sitting at the table, working by lamplight. He looked up when he heard her, concern crossing his face. "Cannot sleep. Too many thoughts in my head," she admitted. She sat down across from him. "What are you working on?" "Going over the accounts, making sure everything is in order before we leave." He set down his pencil. "Are you worried about the trip?" "A little. Mostly I am worried about other things." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Russell, I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about what you said about being in love with me, and I have been trying to sort out what I feel." He went very still, his eyes fixed on her face. "You do not owe me an explanation, Delilah. I know, but I want to give you one anyway." She folded her hands on the table, focusing on them instead of his face. "When Marcus threw me out, I thought my life was over. I thought I was worthless, that I had failed at the one thing women are supposed to be good at. I was ready to die in that street. And then you came along and saved me, and you have been saving me every day since. You made me feel like I matter, like I have value beyond being someone's wife. You made me remember that I am a person with my own thoughts and dreams and abilities." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "So yes, I am grateful to you, but it is more than that. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I worry about you when you are out working in the heat. I feel safe with you in a way I have never felt with anyone else. I think about what our lives could be like together, and it makes me happy. So I think what I am trying to say is that I am falling in love with you too. Maybe I have been for a while now, but I am scared, Russell. I am so scared of being wrong again, of trusting the wrong person." Russell reached across the table and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and firm, anchoring her. "I cannot promise that I will never make mistakes or never disappoint you. I am human, and humans are flawed. But I can promise that I will never betray you the way he did. I will never lie to you or throw you away when things get hard. I will stand by you, Delilah, through whatever comes, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to feel secure in that." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of the walls around her heart finally beginning to crumble. "I do not want to wait anymore. I have spent too much of my life being afraid. I want to be brave. I want to take this chance with you." Russell stood and pulled her up with him, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the lamplight. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Delilah melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, and felt something click into place in her soul. This was right. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not a cage, but a freedom. Not a burden, but a gift. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Delilah Turner, and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice in trusting me." "I believe you," she whispered. And she did. They left for Tucson the next morning, riding side by side on horseback. The journey took the better part of 2 days, crossing desert scrubland and rocky terrain. They camped under the stars the first night, lying close together for warmth. Russell pointed out constellations, telling her the stories behind them, and Delilah listened with her head on his shoulder, marveling at how far she had come from that desperate woman dying in the street. Tucson was larger and busier than Naco, a territorial capital bustling with commerce and activity. Russell conducted his business at the land office, filing the paperwork to expand his property boundaries, and Delilah explored the shops and markets. It felt like an adventure, a glimpse of a wider world. But what she enjoyed most was simply being with Russell, walking beside him through the streets, eating meals together at the hotel, talking late into the night about their hopes and plans for the future. On their last evening in Tucson, Russell surprised her by taking her to a photographer's studio. "I want a picture of us," he explained, "something to remember this trip by." They posed stiffly in front of the camera, Russell standing behind Delilah's chair with his hand on her shoulder. The photographer disappeared under his black cloth, and there was a flash of light and the smell of chemicals. When they returned the next day to collect the finished photograph, Delilah stared at it in wonder. The two people in the picture looked happy, comfortable with each other. They looked like a couple in love. "Can we make one more stop before we head back?" Russell asked as they prepared to leave Tucson. "There is someone I want you to meet." He led her to a small office on the outskirts of town, where a lawyer named Mr. Henderson kept practice. The man was elderly, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Russell explained Delilah's situation, and Mr. Henderson listened carefully, making notes. "It is a complicated matter," he said when Russell had finished. "The territory does recognize divorce, but the grounds are limited. However, abandonment and adultery are both valid reasons. If your husband cast you out and took up with another woman, you would have a strong case." Delilah felt hope flutter in her chest. "How long would it take?" "Several months, most likely. You would need to file a petition, and your husband would have to be served with papers. There would be a hearing. But based on what you have told me, I believe you would prevail." He named a fee that made Delilah wince, but Russell immediately nodded. "We will do it, whatever it takes." Mr. Henderson drew up the initial papers, and Delilah signed them with a shaking hand. It felt momentous, like declaring her independence. When they left the office, she felt lighter, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying for years. The ride back to the ranch was full of plans and dreams. They talked about expanding the herd, maybe adding some sheep or goats. They discussed the possibility of building an addition onto the house, creating more space. Everything felt possible now, the future a bright horizon instead of a dark tunnel. When they arrived home, Delilah felt like she was truly coming home for the first time in her life. This place, with its rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings, was more hers than the fancy house in Naco had ever been. She and Russell fell back into their routine, but everything felt different now. There was an ease between them, an understanding that they were building toward something permanent. October arrived, painting the scrubland in shades of gold and rust. Delilah tended her garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables and preparing for the cooler months ahead. Russell worked on repairs to the barn and corral, getting everything ready for winter. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch or by the fire, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck. Word came in early November that the divorce papers had been served. Marcus had been furious, according to the messenger, and had threatened to contest the proceedings. But Mr. Henderson had sent a reassuring letter saying that Marcus's threats were empty bluster. The evidence was too clear, the case too strong. The divorce would go through. December brought cold winds and frost in the mornings. Russell and Delilah celebrated Christmas quietly, exchanging simple gifts. She had made him a new shirt from fabric she had purchased in Tucson, carefully embroidering his initials on the cuff. He gave her a beautiful shawl of soft wool and a book of poetry that must have cost him a fortune. They cooked a special dinner together and danced to music only they could hear, Russell humming a tune while Delilah laughed in his arms. As the year turned from 1882 to 1883, Delilah reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been trapped in a loveless marriage, slowly dying inside. Now she was free, or nearly so, and deeply in love with a man who treated her like she hung the moon. It seemed impossible, like something out of one of the romantic novels she had secretly read as a girl. The final hearing for the divorce was scheduled for February. Russell wanted to accompany her, but Delilah insisted on facing Marcus alone. This was something she needed to do for herself, to close this chapter of her life with her head held high. The courthouse in Tucson was cold and formal, all wood paneling and harsh light. Delilah sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap as the judge reviewed the case. Marcus sat on the other side of the aisle with his lawyer, refusing to look at her. His mistress was nowhere to be seen, and Delilah wondered if he had already tired of her. The proceedings were surprisingly quick. Mr. Henderson presented the evidence, including sworn statements from several people in Naco who had witnessed Marcus's relationship with the other woman, and confirmed that he had thrown Delilah out while she was ill. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that Delilah had been the one to leave, that she had abandoned her marital duties, but the judge was not swayed. "It is clear to this court that Mrs. Turner was wronged by her husband," the judge said, his voice stern. "The marriage is hereby dissolved on the grounds of adultery and abandonment. Mrs. Turner is awarded nothing, as there are no joint assets or children to consider, but she leaves this union with her reputation and rights restored." Just like that, it was over. Delilah walked out of the courthouse a free woman, and the winter sun had never felt so warm on her face. She found Russell waiting outside with the horses, and when he saw her expression, he swept her up in a fierce hug. "It is done," he asked. "It is done. I am free, Russell, truly free." He kissed her there in front of the courthouse, not caring who might see. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning like fools, he said, "Then I have a question to ask you. Delilah Turner, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, not because you need protection or security, but because you choose to, because you love me as much as I love you?" Delilah's heart felt like it might burst from happiness. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in March, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with only a handful of friends as witnesses. Delilah wore a new dress of soft blue calico, and Russell wore his best shirt and vest. The local minister presided, speaking about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage vows. When Russell slipped a gold band onto Delilah's finger, replacing the ring she had discarded months ago, she felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "You are crying," Russell murmured as they were pronounced husband and wife. "I am happy," she said. "So incredibly happy." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of nervous laughter and whispered words. Russell was patient and gentle, making sure Delilah felt safe and cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed they would now share, Delilah marveled at the difference between this marriage and her first. With Marcus, the wedding night had been awkward and uncomfortable, a duty to be endured. With Russell, it was a celebration, a joining of two people who truly loved each other. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle calved, and Delilah spent hours in the barn helping with the difficult births. She had never thought of herself as someone who could handle such work, but Russell taught her patiently, and she discovered a strength she had not known she possessed. Together, they built something real, a partnership based on respect and affection. In late April, Delilah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited a week, then two, before allowing herself to hope. When she finally told Russell her suspicion, he looked stunned, then elated. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. It is too early to be certain, but I think so." Delilah placed her hand over her still flat stomach. "I never thought I would have this chance." Russell pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. "We are going to be parents. I cannot believe it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Delilah suffered from terrible nausea in the early months. Russell hovered over her anxiously, trying to anticipate her every need. She found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she could not be angry with him. He was just so obviously thrilled about the baby. As her belly swelled with new life, Delilah felt a contentment she had never known. She and Russell talked endlessly about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the lessons they would teach their child. They argued good-naturedly about names, Russell favoring strong traditional choices while Delilah preferred something more unusual. In November, as the year turned toward winter again, their daughter was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Delilah feared she would not survive. But Russell stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And finally, in the early hours of the morning, a thin wail announced the baby's arrival. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the squirming bundle on Delilah's chest. "A healthy baby girl." Delilah looked down at her daughter and fell instantly, irrevocably in love. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers that wrapped around Delilah's thumb with surprising strength. Russell, who had tears streaming down his face, gently touched the baby's head. "She is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like her mother." They named her Rose after Russell's mother, and she became the center of their world. Russell proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when she cried, making silly faces to coax out her first smiles. Delilah watched him with their daughter and felt her heart expand with love. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources and winters that seemed endless. Rose was joined by two more children, a boy named James and then another girl named Grace. The house felt small and crowded, but it was filled with laughter and love. Russell expanded the ranch steadily, and they became known throughout the territory as fair employers and good neighbors. Delilah occasionally thought about her old life, about Marcus and the woman she had been when he cast her out. She heard through the grapevine that he had eventually married his mistress, only to have that marriage end in scandal and financial ruin. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a distant sort of pity. That chapter of her life felt like it had happened to someone else, a different woman in a different lifetime. One evening in the summer of 1890, Delilah sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rose now 6 years old and playing in the yard with her younger siblings. Russell came out and settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand in his as he always did. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Delilah said honestly. "How different my life could have been if you had not stopped that day in Naco, if you had walked past me like everyone else." Russell squeezed her hand. "I could never have walked past you. From the moment I saw you, something in me knew you were important." that you were going to change my life. We changed each other's lives." Delilah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and given her everything she had ever dreamed of. "I love you, Russell Dawson, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That is good," Russell said with a smile, "because I plan on spending every tomorrow for the rest of our lives showing you just how much I love you back." As the sun dipped below the horizon and their children's laughter filled the air, Delilah reflected on the winding path that had brought her to this moment. She had been broken and cast aside, left to die in a dusty street. But she had been given a second chance, rescued by a cowboy with a kind heart and gentle hands. Together, they had built a life filled with love and purpose, proving that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. Rose ran up to the porch, her face flushed with exertion. "Mama, Papa, come play with us." Russell stood and held out his hand to Delilah. "What do you say? Should we join them?" Delilah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Absolutely." They walked hand in hand into the yard, where their children greeted them with squeals of delight. As they played together in the fading light, Delilah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was what happiness looked like. This was home, and she would never take a single moment of it for granted. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under Russell and Delilah's careful management. They added more land and more cattle, eventually employing several ranch hands to help with the work. Delilah became known throughout the territory for her kindness, often taking in travelers who needed a meal or a place to stay. She never forgot what it felt like to be cast aside, and she was determined to show others the same compassion that Russell had shown her. Rose grew into a strong, independent young woman who loved working alongside her father on the ranch. James proved to have a gift with horses, training them with a patience and skill that amazed everyone. Grace, the baby of the family, was quiet and bookish, always with her nose in a book from the growing collection Delilah had assembled over the years. In 1895, when Rose turned 12, she asked her mother about her past. Delilah had always been honest with her children, believing they deserved to know the truth. She told Rose about Marcus, about being cast out sick and alone, and about how Russell had saved her life. "So Papa is not your first husband?" Rose asked, her young face serious. "No, he was not. But he is my true husband, the one I was meant to be with. Sometimes we have to go through hard times to find our way to where we are supposed to be." Rose considered this, then nodded. "I am glad you found Papa, and I am glad he found you." "So am I, sweetheart, so am I." By the turn of the century, the ranch had grown into a successful operation. Russell and Delilah were respected members of the community, known for their integrity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation that held firm no matter what storms came their way. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Russell arranged a special celebration. He took Delilah back to Tucson, to the same hotel where they had stayed on their first trip together. It was a sentimental journey, revisiting the places where they had first fallen in love. "You remember that photographer's studio?" Russell asked as they walked the streets. "Let us get another picture made. See how we have changed." The resulting photograph showed two people whose faces bore the marks of time and hard work, but whose eyes still held the same warmth and affection. When they compared it to the first photograph, taken nearly 20 years earlier, Delilah was struck by how much and how little had changed. They were older, certainly, with lines around their eyes and touches of gray in their hair. but the connection between them, visible even in a still photograph, had only grown stronger. "We have had a good life," Russell said as they prepared to return home. "No regrets." "Not a single one," Delilah replied firmly. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, everything I did not even know I needed. You gave me a home, a family, and most importantly, you gave me yourself. I would not change a single moment of our journey together." Russell pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding night. "Here is to the next 20 years and all the adventures still to come." As they rode back to their ranch, to their children and their life together, Delilah reflected on the long and winding road that had brought her to this place of deep contentment. She had learned that love was not about grand gestures or pretty words. It was about showing up every day, about choosing each other again and again through the mundane and the difficult. It was about building something together, brick by brick, choice by choice. The ranch continued to thrive, and as their children grew older and started families of their own, Delilah and Russell became grandparents. Rose married a neighboring rancher and presented them with 2 grandsons. James took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving himself more than capable. Grace surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Naco to educate the children of the growing community. In 1910, as Delilah approached her 50th birthday, she received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in Naco, informing her that Marcus had died of pneumonia. He had left no will and no heirs, and his few remaining possessions were being sold to settle his debts. The letter inquired whether she wished to make any claim on his estate. Delilah read the letter twice, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for a life wasted. She wrote back immediately, declining any claim and wishing the lawyer well in settling the estate. When Russell asked about the letter, she told him simply, "Marcus is dead. That part of my life is truly over now." "How do you feel about it?" Russell asked carefully. "Relieved, I suppose." "Not because he is dead, but because it feels like closing the last chapter of a book I finished reading long ago. My real life, my true life, began the day you picked me up in that street." She took his hand, marveling at how familiar and dear it had become. "Everything before you was just prologue." The second decade of the new century brought changes to the territory. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and the world seemed to be moving faster, embracing new technologies and ideas. But on their ranch, some things remained constant. Russell and Delilah still rose with the sun, still worked side by side, still found comfort in each other's presence. As they entered their 60s, they began to slow down, letting James and his wife take over more of the ranch work. Delilah spent her days in the garden she had expanded over the years, finding peace in the rhythm of planting and harvesting. Russell, whose joints had begun to ache with age, focused on training horses, passing on his knowledge to his grandchildren. One evening in the summer of 1915, as they sat on the porch watching yet another magnificent sunset, Russell said, "Do you remember what you said to me once, about loving me more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow?" "I remember," Delilah replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is still true, you know. Every day I wake up and think I cannot possibly love you more than I already do, and every day I am proven wrong. My love for you just keeps growing, keeps deepening, even after all these years." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I know exactly what you mean. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Russell Dawson, the very best thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Their grandchildren's voices drifted from the house, arguing good-naturedly about something. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle and the whinny of horses. It was the music of their life, familiar and beloved. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Delilah thought about that long-ago day in Naco when she had been at her lowest point. She had been sick, abandoned, ready to die. She could never have imagined then that her life would become so rich, so full of love and purpose. She had been saved not just physically but spiritually, given a second chance to become the person she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked, echoing a question he had asked her countless times over the years. "About second chances," Delilah replied. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best moments. About how grateful I am that you were the kind of man who could not walk past someone in need." "I am grateful too. Grateful that I was in the right place at the right time. Grateful that you trusted me enough to let me help. Grateful for every single day we have had together." Rose emerged from the house, now a woman in her 30s with children of her own. "Mama, Papa, dinner is ready." "Are you going to sit out here all night?" "Just a few more minutes," Russell called back. To Delilah he said quietly, "I want to remember this moment. You and me, our family all around us, the ranch thriving. This is what I dreamed of when I came west all those years ago. I just did not know it until I found you." They rose together, moving slowly, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But their hands were still clasped, their steps still matched. They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and laughter of their family. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last the rest of their lives. The dinner table was crowded with family, children and grandchildren talking over each other, sharing stories and jokes. Delilah looked around at all the faces, each one precious to her, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was her legacy, not just the ranch or the property, but these people. This family that she and Russell had created together, built on a foundation of love and respect and unwavering commitment. After dinner, as the younger children were put to bed and the adults settled in for coffee and conversation, James raised his cup in a toast. "To my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like. Thank you for everything you have taught us, and for the example you set every day." The others echoed the sentiment, raising their own cups. Delilah looked at Russell through the candlelight and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. They had done well, the two of them. They had taken broken pieces and fashioned something whole and beautiful. They had loved fiercely and lived fully, and they had no regrets. As the evening wore on, and the family gradually dispersed to their own homes or rooms, Delilah and Russell were left alone again. They prepared for bed in the comfortable silence of long marriage, each knowing the other's routines by heart. As they lay down together, Russell pulled Delilah close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Russell replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found their way through hardship and heartbreak to a place of profound contentment. Outside, the desert night was alive with sound and movement, but inside, all was peaceful. The ranch that had once been just a bachelor's simple home was now a testament to what two people could build together when they chose love over fear, courage over despair. And so the years continued to unfold, each one a gift, each day a chance to love and be loved in return. Delilah never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to losing everything. But more importantly, she never forgot to be grateful for the second chance she had been given, for the cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, and for the life they had built together on a small ranch in the Arizona desert. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic sweeps of history. It was simpler than that and more profound. It was the story of two ordinary people who found extraordinary love in the most unlikely of circumstances. It was a story of redemption and healing, of trust rebuilt and faith rewarded. It was a love story, pure and simple, and it was theirs alone. As Delilah grew older still, into her 70s and eventually her 80s, she would often sit on that same porch where she and Russell had shared so many conversations. Russell remained by her side, still reaching for her hand, still making her laugh, still choosing her every single day. Their love, tested by time and hardship, had only grown more precious with age. On a warm spring morning in 1925, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, Russell passed away peacefully in his sleep with Delilah holding his hand. She grieved deeply, as was only natural after losing the love of her life, but she did not despair. She had been blessed with more than 40 years of true happiness, and she carried the memory of Russell's love with her like a lamp in the darkness. Delilah lived another 5 years, spending her remaining time with family and tending her beloved garden. She told stories about Russell to anyone who would listen, ensuring that his memory and the example of their love would live on in the hearts of their descendants. When she finally joined him in the spring of 1930, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, her last words a whispered, "I am coming, my love." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but bearing the dates of their marriage and the words, "True love never dies." Their children and grandchildren continued to work the ranch, passing it down through generations, and the story of how Russell and Delilah found each other became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, because in the end, that is what matters most. Not wealth or fame or grand accomplishments, but love, the kind of love that sees someone at their lowest and offers a helping hand, the kind of love that chooses to stay when leaving would be easier, the kind of love that builds homes and families and legacies that last long after we are gone. That was the love Russell and Delilah shared, and it was a love worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth aspiring to. Their story began with betrayal and sickness, with a woman dying in a dusty street and a cowboy who could not look away. But it ended with triumph, with a life fully lived and a love that conquered every obstacle. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transforming power of genuine affection and care. And it served as a reminder that sometimes, when everything seems darkest, hope can arrive in the form of a stranger with kind eyes and a willingness to take a chance on someone who has lost everything. From that terrible day in Naco, Arizona, when Delilah thought her life was over, to the peaceful final years surrounded by the family she and Russell created together, their journey was one of healing and growth, of learning to trust again and daring to love more deeply than either had thought possible. It was not always easy, and there were challenges along the way, but they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. And so, their story became part of the fabric of the American West, a tale of love and redemption in a harsh and unforgiving land. It was a story that proved that even in the roughest circumstances, beauty could bloom, and that the greatest adventures were not those of gunfights and gold strikes, but of two hearts finding their way to each other and choosing, every single day, to stay together. That was the legacy Russell and Delilah left behind, a legacy of love that would inspire generations to come and remind them all that true love, when it is found, is worth fighting for, worth nurturing, and worth treasuring for all the days of our lives.